Hello and welcome back to Emotionally Speaking. I'm Carla McLaren, and this week we are looking at anger and forgiveness. Now, in my book, The Language of Emotions, on pages 117 to, I think I've got it here, 122, I do a good 5 pages on anger and forgiveness. And for many people, there's not even one page. It's better to forgive, right? Forgiveness is put up above us as this saintly, and anger is like, so if you're angry at someone who has wounded you or traumatized you, you are seen to be in a lower position than someone who has forgiven. And bullshit. What I see with anger and forgiveness is that they are not opposites. They are absolutely crucial aspects of the same process of healing. And that anger has its place and must occur, because what anger tells you is that a boundary has been broken, a rule has been broken, and my psyche has been wounded, right? Or even, my body, my emotions, whatever. I have been wounded. And anger will come up and say that. And it will articulate all of the different areas in which you've been wounded. And it's important to get very, very specific if you're doing an empathic approach to emotions, which is to listen to them, to treat them with respect, and to take their information seriously and as aspects of your genius rather than aspects of your failure, right? So, if you try to go to forgiveness before you've actually felt what the wound is and how it occurred and how it affected you, your forgiveness is basically nothing. It's a throwaway piece of nothing, because you don't know what you're forgiving. You might as well just send a note, like just scribble on a note and throw it at someone. That's what that level of forgiveness means. It will probably make the other person feel better. Whew! I don't have to deal with any repercussions of being an abusive person, or even being an uncareful person, or being a person who can't manage my emotions. I just got to get out of jail free card. No, that's not what real forgiveness is. Real forgiveness is an emotive process. It's a process of deep, deep honesty and of holding people accountable, right? It is not about giving them, a get out of jail free card. And as a trauma survivor, I heard I can't even tell you how many times I heard people tell me to forgive. And what they are saying is, one, I heard this thing about forgiveness and I'm not intelligent enough to question it. Sorry, I just called them out. Two, when you are in forgiveness, Carla, you make me feel more comfortable, because I cannot deal with the understanding of and emotional response to the kind of pain that you experienced. So please forgive, because I cannot handle this, right? And wow, that is not a good thing to do to a trauma survivor, right? That is not helpful. That is not supportive. And I'm not forgiving you for it, okay? So no forgiveness until you fix that behavior. So the process with anger is, anger tells you what has occurred. And if you work with the anger and feel it and bring out the shame and the grief and all the other emotions that will come forward in response to true wounding and trauma, then you and your emotions can figure out what happened, identify the difficulties, focus your emotional energies on supporting and healing you as you move through those. And then at the end of that incredibly emotive and often painful process, you are whole again. And from that place of wholeness, right, which you arrived at through emotional honesty and through doing your real work in response to the very real injury that you endured, then from this place of being anger resource, so instead of anger focusing out like, I'd like to kill that guy, you have your boundaries back, you have your capacity to ground, you have your capacity to identify safe and unsafe people, you have done the work, right? Then you can look at that person and honestly say, not the old nasty forgiveness phrase, which is, I see you are doing the best you knew how. And I'm like, really? If that's the best you knew how, honestly, you belong in prison. If that's the best you knew. So my forgiveness is not going to take away the need for you to go to prison for that behavior, right? But it says the forgiveness statement, which is, I see you were doing what worked for you at the time, but it never worked for me. Never. And it never will again. I'm not going to recreate this traumatic process in my life. I'm not going to invite people in who might not be, the physical abuser or the sexual abuser, whatever. It might not look specifically like that, but the whole energy is just the same. What I notice is if you forgive too early, what you tell your emotions and your entire psyche is, don't pay attention to that. That's actually not a problem, that thing that happened. That's not a problem. And I see this time and time again, people who forgive too early. For instance, they forgive a sexual abuser. Then they'll go into job after relationship that are specifically like being abused in childhood, even though nobody's sexually abusing them, right? But they're abusing them in every other way. And they are treating them as unimportant foci of their drama and their incapacity of dealing with their own problems and their own emotions, right? So running to forgiveness might make you look cool, and it will make other people who don't understand emotions feel better. But running to forgiveness is very dangerous, because if you're not whole and if you haven't done the work to actually heal the trauma that you experienced, you're still an open book. You're still an open target for anybody who wants to use you as a target again. So forgiveness, let me do forgiveness of something where someone has offended against you. So the anger comes up, and also for me, so does grief, because whatever I thought that relationship was, it's dead now. We might be able to reanimate it, but it's going to be a different relationship. But the person has hurt me, in kind of a bad way. Very incapable, emotionally incompetent, lashing out, being inappropriate, being unprofessional, being disloyal, that sort of thing. So I would say, hi, we need to have a difficult conversation, right? I'm lighting it up. It's going to be difficult. I see that you have done this thing, and this has wounded me, and I'm sorry that we don't have a relationship that could have weathered it, where you could have talked to me about before you did this thing, or where you could have been honest with me. But it's really not okay what happened. And then the person does what they do. A lot of people will attack back. Well, you did this, you did that, you did this, you did that, right? And a lot of people give up at that point. But if I'm going to forgiveness, and if I'm going to letting go and rebuilding my sense of self after this wound, I can say, I see what you're saying, and we still haven't talked about the original issue, which is that this happened. And again, I'm very sad, and I feel grief that our relationship wasn't strong enough for you to come to me and with me into this conflict in a way that we could get to the other side in a healthy way. And maybe the person will have listened then. And I can say, I see what you were doing, and I see what the ideas you had were. And at the same time, it wasn't cool. Right? So I'm holding the person accountable. I'm not attacking. They're attacking, blah, 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 blah. Okay. And I just keep going with sadness, with grief. And my anger is there because I am setting a boundary. I'm like, I hear that. And it can end if the person doesn't fight and is apologetic and wants to move forward, then you can go through the emotions and the turmoil that is required to get to a better place in your relationship where you can then trust that person again, right? But going there first is really the coward's way out. To say, I see you did something really bad, and I understand that you were tired and blah, 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 blah. You're making excuses for the person, and you're helping them remain emotionally incompetent, right? Anger is an incredibly relational emotion, and I say this a lot. You cannot get angry about something that isn't crucially important to you. If somebody does something that doesn't mean anything to you, your anger is going to be like, I don't even care. But someone can do something sort of soft, and it can get you in one of the most important areas of your life. So they could just sidle up to you and just softly say, "You don't take very good care of your parents, do you?" And boom, you're off to the races of rage and anger and trauma and that sort of thing. It's important to understand that anger is relational, and it's going to be able to tell you about the relationship to that thing, your parents and your care for them, and that person, right? And so a lot of people, not knowing how to work with anger in even the smallest way, will just attack that person. You're like, "I take better care of my parents than you do, and fuck off. Get out." Which, now there's more people injured, and you haven't really dealt with the trauma at all. You haven't dealt with the wound. Now you're in, fight or flight. But you can also look at someone and sort of look down on them and go, "I forgive you, for your insensitivity." Right? Call them out at the same time. But if you just go to forgiveness, then that really important situation in the relationship is erased and is made unimportant. And the really important relationship you have with your parents and the care of your parents also gets erased. So in that level of forgiveness, in that simplistic, avoidant forgiveness, what you've got is a wound that is open and unhealed, and a relationship that is wounded and unhealed. And things are going to go downhill from there, because you did the forgiveness without the anger, without the grief, without the sadness, without the fear, without whatever emotions need to come up and tell you what happened, right? You did fake forgiveness. Now, our friend Jesus, he said we should forgive 70 times 7 times. And I don't think he meant that we have to line up 490 people and have them, transgress against us. I forgive you, boom, I forgive you, But that it's a process. And sometimes you will say, okay, I can see, I'll go to my story. I can see that my child molester was molested in childhood, and he thought that he was reliving his trauma in a way that now he had the power, right? Now, it's absolutely untrue. He didn't have the power. He was out of control. But I see in his mind, and a lot of abusers' minds, that if they take the position of the abuser, they think that they've moved to the next stage of healing, right? So I could forgive him for that. But then there are things like, hold on, I'm still angry. Wait, hold on, here's what I don't forgive him for, right? And then you could think, wait a minute, am I failing at forgiving? Or does that first forgiveness go away? And I'm like, no, I can still forgive him for that. But here's something that I do not forgive him for. And then I've got to do the emotional work, right? And I don't know if I'm going to do it 70 times, 7 times. But Jesus told us it's a process. It's not something I forgive you. Boom. It's all magic. Now all my wounds are healed and blah, blah, blah. But when you can forgive, and you saw that, and I was transmitting the correct emotions that I feel, which is kind of a bemusement and a sorrow and a what are you even thinking about an abuser trying to deal with his or her pain by becoming an abuser. I sort of, I get it. It's a very twisted kind of weirdness. But if all you know is abuse, then all you know is the victim or the abuser. Victim, abuser. I'm going to be the abuser. That sounds good. Instead of understanding that this is a place you don't want to be at all, right? This is not a good area of the neighborhood to be in. You want to be able to walk away from it. And instead of that, he sort of enclosed himself in hell and never felt any relief from being the abuser. You know, it didn't make him feel any better. He was an alcoholic. He was emotionally unstable. He was a mess. Right? He was just a disaster of a person. But I saw the logic or the illogic of thinking that he was becoming powerful by becoming the thing that frightened him when he was a little boy. Right? So I do forgive him for that. And if that's all you know, and you never saw a different way, then what else are you going to do? Are you going to still be a victim when you're an adult male? I don't think so. If you only have two options, you're going to do the other one. Become an abuser. It's, you know, a terrible choice in both instances, but it somehow feels better or stronger, except for the part where you're just killing your own soul. Oops. Right? So your forgiveness can be real in certain areas. I forgive you for that. And then you're like, whoa, hold on. Here's what I don't forgive you for. And for something like childhood sexual assault, and I think I was 2.5 or 3 when it started, and it went for, I don't know, a year or so. That was a long time and a lot of early developmental trauma and a lot of assaults and wounds to my psyche. So whatever I could identify, I would work through it and then see him as not, God's perfect child or whatever, but as someone making terrible decisions in the face of a terrible situation, right? That were never going to work. And he was just digging himself further and further into hell. And that was his decision. And then, a couple of weeks or months later, I would hit another area of it, and I go, boom, and I would be angry again, and that's fine. Being angry is fine. It's totally okay. You have a right to be angry if you've lost, major parts of your psyche in early childhood wounding. That's fine, right? And then move through it. First I'm enraged, then I'm feeling grief, and then depression, and even the suicidal urge, and all the emotions. And then when I've moved through that one, and I can see the end of the story, I can look at him and go, okay, I get it, right? So having done that over a period of years, I can look at him as a figure of pity and not as someone I am enraged at or want to murder or need to get revenge on or anything. He's a mess. He's a disaster. And he's an abused child trying to figure out his life, right? So forgiveness doesn't look, it's not the opposite of anger. And it doesn't look like people want it to look, where you're just like, I forgive. Everybody is God's perfect child working on their own way. Nah, some of them aren't. And, Jesus would be like, nah, he's not perfect. Nope, no. That one needs some work, right? So if people are urging you to forgive, look at their problems with emotions and look at what they want you to do. Are they wanting you to forgive for free, right? And if people who have hurt you want you to forgive, and they're not going to apologize or make any changes in their behavior or do anything to make amends, then they're wanting forgiveness for free, and that's not your job. Because giving that forgiveness for free means that you are helping them go to the next relationship with even fewer skills than they had in yours. So forgiveness has to follow an emotive, an apologetic, a shifting, and a deep process. It's not just simple-minded, I forgive. And so when people want you to forgive and, you get angry at them, I just want you to know that usually it's because they don't have any practice whatsoever for their own emotions, for their angers and rages and griefs and sadnesses and depressions, for their jealousy and envy, for their fear, for their panic. They don't have the wherewithal to do the work that will end up in a real and powerful sense of forgiveness that comes from a strong person looking at someone who is damaged, right? And no longer wants to do damage to them, right? It's very different. So if people are asking you to forgive, go to forgiveness, go to forgiveness. Just understand what they're saying is, I can't manage you not being in forgiveness. And then you can forgive them for being weak and move on. And you can just say, you know what? Healing from this requires more than merely forgiving. And I need to work in the way that my psyche and my soul and this wounding requires me to work. And if I end up at forgiveness in a time frame that works for you, then that's great. And if I don't, I just want you to check in on your own self. Because requiring an abuse survivor or a person who is wounded to forgive on your timeline is a further abuse. Okay? So don't do it. Don't do it. I don't care who tells you that forgiveness is better than anger. What I'm saying is, if it's a really serious wound, you have to go through the really serious healing to get to the place. And what I've seen is you do get there, right? But it's not this instantaneous thing. If it is, I'm going to be wanting you to be careful about identifying the further abuse that's going on, because you gave away forgiveness for free without doing the work that forgiveness requires. So, anger and forgiveness are the opposite? Nope, not if you do it right. They are like this. You have to know what the wound was in order to forgive it, right? And you have to fix it in order to be able to stand up and say, I see you. You did what worked for you at the time, and it never worked for me. We're done. Thank you. See you next time. Bye-bye.